Hi, I'm Paul Mahoney, and this is Proper Wealth, the show where we discuss all things wealth creation with a focus on property. Joining me today is Ben and Rayna Hunter from LH1, property investors and global master agents to residential developers. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you for asking us.
Yeah, hi.
So, as property investors yourselves, and with a lot of experience in sourcing, the right sites in the right locations, today we're talking about the Leeds property market as the next buy-to-let hotspot. So, perhaps we can start with passing it over to you on why Leeds.
I think Northern Powerhouse is obviously a big focus for buy-to-let investors. You're looking at capital growth prospects, lower costs of entry, lower capital value units, and high yielding. Manchester, Liverpool, they've been talked about for the last couple of years, and Leeds is very much a bit sort of an untapped area and focus for investment, and I think it's an opportunity to get in ahead of the curve where others are possibly topping out a little bit in terms of values.
Yeah, okay. I tend to agree. If you look back probably 3-4 years or so, London was the focus. And when you look to even Birmingham, Manchester, people weren't really quite comfortable with those areas yet, so far as all the things you just mentioned. And that's now proved itself, hasn't it? We've seen the capital growth. We've seen everything that's happening in those cities, whereas Leeds is probably a couple of years behind and perhaps the next Manchester, if you like.
Agreed. I think the other thing when trying to identify a target location for investment is what's happening, what is happening in that city over the next couple of years. And the very interesting thing about Leeds is, of course, the South Bank regeneration scheme, which is the largest city centre regeneration scheme in Europe.
Okay.
About £350 million worth of investment, and it's actually going to double the size of the city over the coming years.
Wow, okay.
So again, that's a really interesting point to take into account.
Great. So obviously we've got the fact that Leeds is now sort of picking up in comparison to those other cities. We've got the infrastructure spending being the mixed use between residential, commercial, retail, creating new jobs, expanding the city. I suppose all the ingredients for what creates a strong property market. Absolutely. Moving in the right direction.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, Leeds obviously has a really good story, and whenever we as investors are looking at an area, we obviously do our thorough due diligence. So we look at what that city has got to offer. It has to have great transport links. Leeds has got a European international airport. Always we like it when they've got universities. In Leeds there are actually 3 universities with about 39,000 students coming out of those. And what's good about Leeds is the fact that the students often stay and start working there. So there's a great demand for properties for tenants, because obviously sometimes they can't afford to buy straight off, so they're looking to rent. So the buy-to-let market is strong in Leeds.
Yeah, okay. All right, and I suppose the thing with students is students are tenants at some point themselves also, and some people like targeting students as tenants, but then once they finish university, as you say, and the postgraduate retention being quite high in Leeds, given the jobs that are now available, they become almost the perfect target market, don't they? Being young professionals on decent incomes that want to live centrally. There's definitely a strong trend toward inner city living, and these are the types of people that want that, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Talking too much. I mean, what I love about Leeds is the fact that, it's got a really good story. The fact that they're voting it the second economic city in the whole of UK outside of London. The financial market is strong there. The tech market is strong there. Channel 4's relocated to Leeds. So when you get big companies relocating to an area where they see the vision for the future, the regeneration is so strong. I mean, that it's an ideal area for people to live and work.
Yeah, okay, and I suppose that's more likeness to Manchester, isn't it?
Yeah.
As we've already covered, we've had BBC and ITV move to Media City or Salford Quays in Manchester, Channel 4 to Leeds. An interesting thing that I heard somebody raise the other day is that in itself, just seeing people on TV with a Leeds accent raises the profile of Leeds, because I think in a way that's what's happened in Manchester.
Yeah.
The world almost was very London central,
Yep.
and now all of a sudden half of the telly they have Manchester accents.
Yeah.
And that's now going to happen with Leeds. So that raises the profile in itself.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about Leeds is also that it's fast becoming a 24-hour European city. So it has a great infrastructure for shopping, very key for a female. And, you know, they've got parks. It's a great cultural destination. Damien Hirst, the artist, is from Leeds. So it draws a lot of people coming into the area with the tourists, the residents, the tech and the professional and the financial institutions, over and above, you know, students looking also for properties to live in.
Yeah. Also, it's only 2 hours from London.
Yes.
Which is, you know, almost commutable, really. When you think it could take, a lot longer than that to get in from London commutable towns at the moment. So
and I suppose so that's at the moment, and then obviously we've got HS2, which, you know, we're assuming will be going ahead. Yeah. There's been a little bit of speculation around that, but I did read yesterday that there was a recommitment from Boris Johnson to the Northern Powerhouse schemes, and also giving cities in the north a bit more power. So that certainly seems to indicate that these infrastructure projects are likely to continue. And that will, you know, very much open up the commutability, won't it, to pretty well all of those major cities we just mentioned. Yeah. Which will have a massive impact.
Well, it's the north-south divide becomes less and less, because everywhere is more accessible, and it means that people could live in Leeds, but if they hypothetically wanted to work in Manchester or Birmingham or even London, you know, it is accessible. And of course, what we're seeing now with the Northern Powerhouse, and particular Leeds is like the sort of rising star in that market, that people can afford to live there because it's not as expensive, obviously, as living in London.
Well, effectively, it expands the commuter belt, doesn't it? And we've already seen what that's done to London, for example. You know, Crossrail, what that's done to the outskirt towns that are on that line, and it's not even done yet.
No.
We've had, you know, 80-90% growth in some of those areas, predominantly due to this expected utility.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, in terms of the growth forecast as well, I mean, you know, JLL, about 20% capital growth in cap vals and rent by about 2022.
Right.
So, you know, this is a strong story.
Yeah, okay. So obviously a lot happening.
Yes, it's a very exciting time for Leeds.
So Rayna, you mentioned before about Leeds being a tourist destination, you know, the galleries and the history, the Pennines, all those sorts of things that attract tourists. So again, I read a number that said that there's 10 million people a year that visit Leeds, which is obviously an economy within itself, the tourist economy.
Yes.
But also as an economy as a whole, you mentioned about financial services and it being a big tech hub. Leeds has grown, the overall economy in Leeds has grown by 40% over the past decade. That's a pretty incredible number when you consider that the UK economy is lucky to grow by 2.5 or 3%.
Yeah.
So a massive stark difference there, which I think in a way is also relatable to property. You know, we're starting at a much lower base. Same will go with the Leeds economy. The property and the economy has started at a much lower base, but now everything is starting to move. And if we tie that back to your point, Ben, so far as us being ahead of the curve, we spoke about Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool. They've all been in the headlines for a few years now, and quite rightly, because they've been the fastest growing cities in the UK for the past 3 or 4 years. That's great. And there's probably still some good opportunities there, but you need to be a little bit more careful. I think everyone would agree on that. Whereas with Leeds, we're probably still ahead of the curve. We can start to see things happening. You know, we're passing a test that I call the gunner test. Is it going to happen? And it looks like it's going to happen in Leeds, because we can see things moving now. We're not just guessing.
Yes.
But we can still get ahead of things, which I think is a good position to be.
Absolutely. And all the signs showing that there is plenty to come is the main thing. And when I mentioned before about the South Bank regeneration project, I think that is a key area of focus. If you're going to be picking what part of the city, then that's a great opportunity to benefit from even further capital growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, it's a perfect example of inward investment, isn't it? You know, nobody spends that sort of money to lose money.
No.
You know, if you can see smart money investing in locations, you can reasonably assume it's a smart location.
Yeah.
Because, there's going to be a lot that's gone into that amount of money being allocated.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you can't lose money on bricks and mortar. It's the old adage, that's the best property or the best investment ever, because you can actually see what you've bought.
Yeah, it's tangible.
Yeah. And obviously, when you can see that you can quantify it by investing in an area of growth, which is like Leeds, for example, and which is also reflective of, the history and the culture, but is also now recognising the modern way and expanding. It's a very exciting time.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think that was very informative. We just need to take a pause here and go to a break. Join us after the break for more on the Leeds property market.
Property is a great investment option, but it's one of the largest purchases that you'll ever make. As individuals, we're all limited by our resources, and regardless of our experience, knowledge or time, we can achieve much more with the help of a qualified team and extra resources being available. Nova Financial specialise in assisting clients to achieve financial freedom through property investment. With over 100 years of experience, we shape your family's future. To invest in property with absolute confidence, call us on 0203 8600 or visit nova.financial.
LH1 London offers a great exit strategy when acting for developers as their international sales and marketing consultant. Our global reach helps you sell your prime located high-density residential development and in turn brings excellent value to the discerning property investor. As investors ourselves, we fully understand the key fundamentals that are required when targeting the next investment hotspot. LH1 London are arguably the UK's most acquisitive buyers of city centre apartment blocks. If you're a developer, then we need to talk.
Hi, I'm John Howard and I'm known as the property expert. The reason for this is over the last 40 odd years, I've bought and sold over 3,500 properties and I'm still going. I'm delighted to pass on my vast experience and knowledge to you through my property seminars that are taking place across the UK this year. To know more, please go to johnhowardpropertyexpert.co.uk.
Meet the Author is a brand new mini-series involving leading experts in the property industry, including mentors, developers, property lawyers and other industry experts who share insightful stories about their journey and their books. Each book is compiled by authors with years of valuable experience, tips and observations, providing you with new knowledge about the property industry. To find out more, visit the website property-tv.co.uk/library.
Welcome back to Proper Wealth. I'm with Ben and Rayna Hunter from LH1 and we're talking about the Leeds property market. So I think we pretty well established before the break that Leeds is a good place to be investing. But obviously Leeds is a relatively big place and there are lots of different types of properties that people could buy in Leeds. So I think it's worth talking about where we feel as though the best buys are and where people should be focusing. So let's talk a little bit on that.
One nice thing about Leeds, of course, is the character. So you get a lot of mill conversions, for example, which is also appealing. So it's not all about just the new build, but from a character perspective, there's a lot of interesting buildings that have been converted into residential. And in terms of the different areas where you get the character properties, Hunslet is an area of Leeds that's been identified for pretty strong capital growth in the relatively short term. Okay. It's a riverside location, which is also nice, and it's literally walking distance into the town centre. So from an investor's perspective, when we're looking at sites or into property, it's got to be somewhere where you'd want to live yourself. Yeah, of course. And Hunslet, it offers that character. It's not just sort of a boring area. It's got a bit of culture and character to it. Yet walking distance to the shops and everything you need, really, transport links and.
Yeah. It's also very close to the South Bank regeneration area, which we mentioned earlier. which is going to be a key, in effect, like new area of Leeds. So the city centre will expand and grow. So therefore, you know, you could argue, well, where is the right place to buy actually in Leeds? I think when you're looking for property, whether it be as an owner-occupier or as an investor, the key is, as Ben said, the transport links, the accessibility. How close am I to a shop? How close am I to walking to a bus stop or the station? So that's key. And of course, it's got to be a place where you want to live, and you think that if you're buying it as an investor, where a tenant would want to live, you know?
Yeah, of course.
It's about the quality of the living as well as the location.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about ticking as many of the boxes so far as what that target market might want. And generally you find the most of those boxes ticked, the more central the location, but then you also need to balance that out with price. And that's what I quite like about that particular location you mentioned, in that it's not the centre of the city, because quite often the centre of the city is a little bit more expensive.
Yeah.
And maybe Leeds, you could be buying in the centre of the city as well, because it's probably a bit cheaper, but still quite often what you'll find is that the city doesn't experience quite as much growth as places on the fringe of the city that experience what's often referred to as the ripple effect.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned about South Bank, for example, and again, if we relate that back to the likes of Manchester, you've only got to look at the areas between Salford Quays and the city centre and what's happened to those areas.
Yeah.
You know, they've gone from being very undesirable to very desirable pretty quickly, because they've been squeezed by, you know, that new media city area and the city centre expanding. And it seems like something quite similar is happening in Leeds, in that you've got the city expanding itself, you know, already a substantial economic and employment hub. You've got the fringes where it's a bit better value, but still walking distance. And then you've got this whole new almost second city, which expands on that. So I think when it comes time to selecting the right properties in the right locations, it makes sense to keep those things in mind. You're balancing out the desirability with the price, ticking as many of the boxes as you can, but also making sure there's some room for movement from a growth perspective as well.
Absolutely. I mean, what's really good about, you know, this Hunslet area that Ben mentioned, because it's obviously close to the South Bank regeneration, but what I really like about it is the character of the area, because there's a lot of, as Ben mentioned, mill conversions, but there's also new build properties as well coming. But I like the fact that it's also close to the River Aire, and there is, you know, with the South Bank regeneration, they are muting the idea of the possibility of a water taxi, which would make it all so more accessible and interesting. And you can see what's happening with a lot of these northern cities, that they're following suit from London, like Shoreditch years ago, where it was deemed a depressed area. Then, you know, these areas have a lot of financial investment, then they regenerate and they suddenly become young, cool, trendy, great spaces to live and work. So,
you know, we've seen it time and time again, haven't we? Shoreditch, a perfect example. Hackney, you know, that's the fastest growing city over the past 30 years, town, over the past 30 years in the UK. It's grown by 850%.
Wow.
Because, you know, 30 years ago, no one wanted to live in Hackney. And it's obviously only a few miles from central London. As the accessibility lines opened up, now everyone wants to live in Hackney. And quite often it's those bohemian areas, you know, which Hackney was one, Shoreditch was another, that you have a bit of a what do they call it, a hipster renaissance.
We were talking recently about Digbeth in Birmingham, which is another similar type of offering that I think is very similar to this one.
I think it's important that if you're an investor, that you are a bit of a visionary. So you have the vision for the future. So you don't look at it, you don't judge the book by the cover. Don't look at the here and now, look at the future. And Leeds in particular, the future is strong. So the investment, whether you're buying a brand new apartment, I mean, obviously the best deals that you're going to get at the moment as an investor is to buy an off-plan apartment, because that way you can sort of put down a small amount now, and then as you know that you would recognise the capital growth during the build cycle. So by the time that you've actually completed your purchase, your property would have escalated in value. So you've got that as well as the rental opportunities thereafter.
Yeah, of course. I think we need to probably clarify that slightly, and I wouldn't go out buying any off-plan property because, in my opinion, there's a scale. There's the risky scale where quite often developers want you paying very high deposits and they may not have all that much experience, and your money might be used for the build, and therefore you're taking a lot of risk. And then at the other end, you've got deposits protected, experienced developers, all those boxes being ticked that we mentioned, and that can be a great deal. And I've seen lots of people do really, really well from that. But I do tend to agree that when investing in sort of city centre or city fringe properties, new build or off-plan properties, especially for the passive investor, are the best purchases because they're very passive.
Yes.
You've got all the warranties, so 2-year builder's defect period, 10-year structural warranty, all of your fixtures and fittings under warranty. It means you can be a lot more certain about what you're getting and also what the numbers are going to be for the first 5 to 10 years. Even just little defects that arise that would usually cost you money are fully covered for the first couple of years.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a big benefit to an investor, especially if they don't live in Leeds, which, I assume probably most of the people watching don't. So, you want to make sure if you're investing far away from home that it's relatively passive, unless you're a property developer or a full-time renovator or whatever that might be. But I don't think that's the majority of people. Most people are just looking to kind of,
Well, it's quite interesting because, we invest ourselves into the off-plan sort of structure, and we're very careful about what we buy into. And I totally endorse everything that you've just said. It's very interesting and refreshing to hear someone sort of establish quite the groundbreaking rules that can be implemented by the right developers.
I think from our perspective, we wouldn't ever entertain an off-plan purchase that wasn't fully protected on the deposit. So it's a very good point that you made there. It's obviously about mitigating risk, isn't it? And that's important. I mean, we've all seen a few horror stories over the last few years about stage payments being unprotected and so forth.
Yeah,
so
I
that's
think
key.
that negatively affects a lot of people's mindset when they're thinking about off-plan. They just think it's the one thing, and that's why I spoke about the scale, because you're right. You read those stories, and therefore some people say, "Oh no, off-plan's too risky for me." But actually, in all the cases, it can be very, very low risk.
Absolutely.
And especially if you're investing for growth, as you quite rightly mentioned, Rayna. If you're investing for growth and the property is going to take 18 months or 24 months to be done, actually you're slightly better off before it's completed because you're in the market for the full property price without having to have a mortgage.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's no risk of servicing that mortgage, and therefore if the price goes up, the return on your deposit can be substantial.
Absolutely right. I guess another little safety precaution there is to make sure that contract is assignable.
Yeah.
A case of change in circumstance through that period, just another way to mitigate risk slightly. But assuming you've got protected deposits and an assignable contract, I think it's an excellent way to go.
But then I think it all comes back down to the fact that if, for the savvy streetwise investor, if you invest now in the areas that are actually slightly depressed, where there's going to be regeneration, then you've got a better opportunity to increase your sort of the profits on your initial investment. So I think
absolutely. As that new infrastructure and facilities and amenities come in, obviously prices tend to increase, both naturally and unnaturally in a way, because developers tend to increase their prices as stages go on and time goes on. But both can be a very positive thing when the market is moving in the right direction for the buyer that gets in early.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think I would always, from an investment perspective, especially in Leeds, I would be looking at buying into an apartment as opposed to a house. We tend to think that houses are more for the owner-occupier market rather than the investor market.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I suppose my focus is usually on identifying the best location and then letting that determine what the best property is.
Yeah.
Now, of course, going back to that approach of central locations and the right, young professionals as the tenants, obviously that does tend to lead you toward apartments. But I think it's more the way you think about it, rather than having a hard and fast rule of saying, let's just invest in apartments. Well, actually, let's invest in what the target market wants, or what makes the most sense in the area. And as you know, generally in central locations, it's either very expensive to the point that it doesn't really make sense as an investment to buy a house, or they just don't really exist. In central areas. It's generally mostly apartments, and then of course people need to understand leases, and that's another thing that people often get scared about. So I think just making sure that people make the right decisions based upon the right information.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this has been a great conversation about Leeds and what makes Leeds a good place to consider. I would say there's still more information for people to know about this particular location before they go and buy there.
Yep.
Yeah.
But a good overview of Leeds, and then also the particular locations and types of properties that people can consider. And as we say, there's a good chance that they're really getting ahead of the curve in a market that's very much moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. I think that is a very good summary. I suppose key is research, and location.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, guys. That's all we've got time for today. Join us next time on Proper Wealth for a discussion on high net worth private banking.
Property is a great investment option, but it's one of the largest purchases that you'll ever make. As individuals, we're all limited by our resources, and regardless of our experience, knowledge or time, we can achieve much more with the help of a qualified team and extra resources being available. Nova Financial specialise in assisting clients to achieve financial freedom through property investment. With over 100 years of experience, we shape your family's future. To invest in property with absolute confidence, call us on 0203 8600 or visit nova.financial.
LH1 London offers a great exit strategy when acting for developers as their international sales and marketing consultant. Our global reach helps you sell your prime located high-density residential development, and in turn brings excellent value to the discerning property investor. As investors ourselves, we fully understand the key fundamentals that are required when targeting the next investment hotspot. LH1 London are arguably the UK's most acquisitive buyers of city centre apartment blocks. If you're a developer, then we need to talk.
My name is John Howard, and I've been investing and developing properties for over 40 years. In that time, I've been very successful, but of course I've always made the odd mistake as well. In my book, I explain how to be successful and what to do should something go wrong. I've survived 3 property recessions. I can help you do the same. My book is available online. Please go to johnhowardpropertyexpert.co.uk.
Meet the Author is a brand new mini-series involving leading experts in the property industry, including mentors, developers, property lawyers and other industry experts who share insightful stories about their journey and their books. Each book is compiled by authors with years of valuable experience, tips and observations, providing you with new knowledge about the property industry. To find out more, visit the website property-tv.co.uk/library.
Hello and welcome to Property TV. I'm Stephen Galpin, host of Property Question Time. We've completed the filming of Series 1, over 260 successful episodes. We're now about to film Series 2. The difference? Well, we're going to be filming in our new studio adjacent to the Canary Wharf development. Keep those questions coming in to us, keep our panellists, our experts busy, and we hope you enjoy the new series as much as you did the last one.